I made this video as a tribute to my favorite obsolete forgotten camera that I think is still perfect for either film students or shooting low budget videos. Now, whenever I'm certain that I'm going to be making or shooting video in bad lighting, I use the Pentax KX DSLR. Because I saw a video made with this camera on YouTube in minimal lighting, and I was so impressed with what I saw. And at the same time, there was this exact camera in a pawn shop, and it was really cheap. Now, the really important part and why I've inserted video in real time out of updating the firmware is that when I got this camera, the real disadvantage was either as soon as I turned on live view or started video, a fully charged battery would only last 5 minutes, and then the camera would shut itself down because it was out of power. Anyway, I was looking for a solution to the other problem I had with it right away, and that is that the camera couldn't see the 64 gig SD card that I had bought for it. And so I found that after the update, and my camera firmware was at version 1, which is the worst one, or the first one, and I noticed right away after the update the time I could shoot went from 5 minutes of video on a charge to almost 25 minutes of video in intermittent use. The other really big advantage of the firmware update is the camera can't see SD cards that are bigger than 32 gig. And after this update, it can use 64 gig cards, and I'm guessing 128 gig cards. So it's almost useless for video without the update. And if you have the KX, the update is free on the Pentax website. Now, why I like using the KX so much for video is because the video footage shot with these cameras has special characteristics. And one of them is that because it's at 24 frames a second, which is the same speed as film, it looks like vintage film footage. Because it's already at the same speed of film, shooting these videos in widescreen have a very cinematic look. Now, the format the KX records in is called AVI, but that's just the container. It's really motion JPEG format, which is old and outdated, and it won't play on some players, which is why I use Handbrake to convert into MP4s. Now, the technical explanation for this is that motion JPEG can't record sound, so it has to be wrapped inside an AVI file. So the video is motion JPEG and the sound file is AVI. Just remember that these AVIs take up a lot of space. Every time I shoot 3 minutes of video, so basically a music video, I get a 500 meg file at least, but they look great. It's at 24 frames a second and it looks like vintage 16mm film footage. Now, the other really pleasant surprise of using this camera is when I loaded the audio file into Handbrake to look at the properties, it said that it was 384 kbps audio, which is high quality audio, even though the camera only has a mono microphone. Now, this means any sound file recorded on can easily be converted to a 320 kbps MP3 with minimal loss of quality, or almost lossless quality. Now, this becomes really valuable if you're forced to use the built-in audio recorder due to circumstances. Now, the biggest limitation of this camera is because it's so old, the maximum video resolution is 720, so bottom level HD. But I don't see this as that big of a problem because converters such as Handbrake can scale up your video to 1080 and possibly 4K. Now, if you try this, the one thing to be aware of is, and I know this from doing a lot of conversions on old silent films that have very low resolution, and in most cases only going up from 640 to 1080, that actually doesn't look bad. But the ones that didn't look good was the very early cinema, because in the films that were shot at 320 by 240, so very early cinema and very low resolution, blown up to 1080, they look like crap because the picture has been enlarged so much to magnify every pixel. Going up from 720 to 1080 isn't a very big jump, but 4K, there I would be worried because of the pixel density. Another thing I like about this camera is how comfortable it is to hold and shoot, especially if you have small hands, because the body is fairly small, but it has a large image sensor, so the image quality is actually surprisingly good. Even with the kit lens, which in medium to low light is a lot like looking down a long dark tube. It's a decent lens, but the camera needs a faster lens. And unfortunately for me, because a 1971 Pentax camera was what I learned photography on, I have Pentax prime lenses, but they're the wrong mount. They're screw mount, and this camera uses the K mount. So I need a K mount to screw mount adapter, and then I can use my prime lenses. But even using the kit lens, I get decent results. I think with either a M42 mount to K-mount adapter or a K-mount prime lens, I think the results would actually be pretty impressive. Another reason I really like this camera, and some of you may not like this camera for this exact same reason, is when I learned photography, all I had was a mechanical camera with only manual settings and no AF motor. And this camera in video mode, the AF motor is disabled. So video is limited to manual focus only, and if you use either the kit lens or old Pentax K lenses, both have manual focus rings. Before I record video, I adjust the focus ring first to exactly the way I want it. If there isn't enough light, you'll have to stop down on the lens, which means using the manual aperture settings, but on the KX they're very simple and work very well. The other reason why I really like using the KX is unlike a lot of other DSLRs, the video is almost point and shoot. And I have a prosumer level DSLR that's more expensive and a little newer than the KX, which takes full HD video, and the still images are much higher quality. But for video, the more expensive camera is much harder to set up, because except for in the most blindingly bright sunlight, the video is almost always gray, underexposed, and grainy compared to the KX. If I want to shoot a video with my more expensive camera, it takes me at least 3 minutes to lock the exposure setting, lock the minimum aperture setting, and do all my manual and custom settings that I have to do in order to get a video that isn't grainy. Whereas this camera, it's almost point and shoot, and if you don't have time before events start, which is what happens a lot of times in real life, the KX is much better than the more expensive camera, because I'm making videos of animals and music videos in small bars where there's almost no light. If you have to be ready in a second because you don't know what's about to happen, KX is perfect because there's almost no setup time. If you have minimal time, you can almost start the video recording without thinking. If you have to zoom in first, because remember, once you start recording video, the AF motor is disabled. I think the reason why the AF is disabled during video is because when I hold this camera body, the microphone is positioned almost directly over top of the AF motor. So I think Pentax has done this on purpose so that you don't hear the AF motor during recording, which is a nice touch. Because I'm an ultra low budget filmmaker and I do this as a hobby. Because since the age of 16, I've dreamed about being Ed Wood, and I can't afford to put money into this. So when I'm forced to use the built-in microphone, I like not having the sound of the AF motor in my recording. Okay, so by now you're probably saying, where's the weenie? Let's see some of the out. So when in doubt, whip it out. So I'm gonna show it to you. There is absolutely no processing in this clip. I did not add brightness or adjust anything. This video was shot only for the purpose that right after I got this camera, after testing the video once to make sure it worked, I shot this video just to see what it would look like in the worst possible lighting conditions that I could find. This video was shot a few days before I did the firmware update, and because the camera couldn't see the 64 gig card that I had just bought for it, I was forced to turn the video down to the lowest quality setting so that the video would fit on the only SD card I had available, which was a 256 meg, not gig card. So I had to turn the video down to the lowest quality. All the other problems in this video are not caused by the camera, they're caused by the camera operator, and specifically that it's shaky. The video is very shaky, and it's shaky because it was at 1 in the morning and I had been sampling the roulette IPA all night, so I couldn't hold the camera straight. But keep in mind, in this video there's almost no light. There was no overhead stage lights, and there were only 2 very small lights at the side of the stage. So this video was shot in almost complete darkness, and everything in it is still visible. It's actually so good that I think if it wasn't shaky, I could have adjusted or turned up the brightness in my editing software, and this probably still could have been a usable video. Again, I'm really impressed with this camera in low light. This video isn't an AVI. I converted it as a test in VLC. But if you want good quality audio, don't convert them in VLC, because the default setting is 128 kbps, which is terrible sounding audio. And whenever I tried to force it to encode it at 192 kbps or higher, it converted the video without sound. So if you want decent audio, don't convert them in VLC. The absolute best results I've had so far with any kind of file conversion is using FFmpeg. When FFmpeg converted the file, the video I got, or the MP4 I got from FFmpeg, was almost exactly like the AVI in sound and video quality. So since this, I only use exclusively FFmpeg based video converters. So anything like Handbrake, good video editors will all have FFmpeg in them, and I think Avidemux does too. This last video sample is the fireworks, and in previous years the fireworks would be launched from a different place, and I was expecting that it would be in the same place that it was last time, and because of this I had to run to catch up to the fireworks, and I missed the first minute. And I barely had time to pull out my camera, and the only other thing to note is this is not an AVI file. This one I converted as a test file in Avidemux into an MP4, and compared to the original, I think this is an almost lossless conversion because the quality looks almost exactly the same as the original AVI. I think Pentax made around 4 million of these cameras, and they're now much cheaper than a used cell phone, except they have a large image sensor and a real lens. It's also very tough. I actually fell on top of it, and it still works.